competitors. Now, I'd make one final point. The way that GE has stayed competitive, Cisco Xerox is, we decided to be global. You know, when I joined GE in 1982, Welch sent all of us over to study the Japanese, right? They're going to kill us. They're going to conquer everything. And you think about the last 30 years, you know, we forced ourselves to look outside our companies, to be global. And there's nothing that assures that the Chinese companies or the German companies are going to stay on top unless they globalize, they compete, they stay edgy. That's what it takes.
Yeah. If I could just add one point, by the way, I love your summary, Jeff. It's exactly right. We also pay attention to things that you would think that it would be easy to not, like the environment. It comes around and it'll get you if you don't do it well eventually. And we have been able to grow successful global companies and do it in a way that does less harm than some others around the world. This is a huge advantage in the short term, and it'll be a massive advantage in the long term. By the way, we still have to be better at this, for sure, because we're not perfect. But when I travel around, I'm always amazed at just how good we govern, how we actually integrate it all together. We don't say, yes, I could get away with dumping this stuff. I could get away with treating our people very badly. It's not even a discussion that we have. We try to do it in the right way. And this is a benefit, I think, in the medium term and in the long term, for sure.
I think we have all the cards to win. The question is, do we have the courage and the will and the fortitude, and do we have the leadership in business and government to say we really want to win? Not incrementalism, improvement. One common theme you see among three leaders here in the companies that we represent is confidence we can take on anyone in the world, but also a healthy paranoia if we don't change, we will get left behind as leaders and as companies. And so this is one that I think we're paying perhaps a little bit the wrong way. It isn't a question of a country has to win or lose. The whole world can win. Currently, the U.S. is at an inflection point. Are our children going to have a higher standard of living than we do or not? And for the first time, that's really being questioned, and their children at the present time will not. And do we want to get back as one of the top participants, but do what America does so well, which is share? Because we all must do the same thing. You sit in a cabinet meeting in Russia. You sit across the table from the Prime Minister in India. You speak to the President in Mexico. There is an openness to saying, how do we bring American concepts and ideas, and how do we all win together, which I think is very doable. And that's what we're really saying. Globalization is here to stay. Speed of innovation is here to stay. It isn't going to create winners and losers unless the companies or the countries make that mistake.
I think that was well said, John. And you mentioned the word paranoid, I think.
Yes.
Companies correctly, leaders are paranoid. I think that came from Intel, but I think that's pervasive. And I mean that in a positive way, that you're always considering.
Yes,
but our country at this point, our national leadership doesn't appear paranoid. In fact, it appears that our political parties are in corners, very opposite from each other, and they may be even putting their party before even their country, and they're not solving the biggest problems or kicking them down for the future. Is that's obviously my opinion, you don't have to agree with it, but do we lack national paranoia that we should be having about, we've obviously led for the last century. Will the United States?
You know, I think everybody, again, what makes us paranoid is that we see a lot. You know, in other words,
we travel
a lot. You know, I spend 60% of my time out of the office, most of the time outside the country. And you know, I've been going to China and India since 1984, right? So I actually know, I have the burden of like knowing what's happening, you know, and that makes me, you know, I get back and I'm like, you know, I sleep like a baby, wake up once an hour crying. That's what it's like to be. That's what it's like to be a CEO. Now, I think what's good, what may be good, and you know, we're all business people, not politicians, but I think with what these elections are telling us is, if unemployment stays at 9.4%, you're going to get fired, right? Every 2 years. And then we don't care about all the debates that can go on cable TV shows and stuff like that. We want to see results. That might create very healthy paranoia, you know, and I get back to goals, metrics, how do you spend your time?
Yeah.
And that's the life that we all live. I think one of the things that we can do, both in the communities we live in Washington, is say, here's what we're seeing in Germany. Here's what we're seeing in India. Here's what we're seeing in Russia. And man, we got to go, because whether or not this is a global economy, that's already been decided. You know, really, it's either is the U.S. going to participate or not participate, but that is no longer a debate. That's been decided. So now it's how do we win? That's got to be the focus.
How do we participate? How do we win? I think the paranoia question is interesting, because I think that we are paranoid, but I think around the wrong things. I mean,
okay. No, we can actually finish each other's sentences, all three of us. Completely agree on both of them.
Yeah, okay. And like I said, John said it really well. This is not a fight about whether or not India should stay behind. I mean, that's also been decided.
It has.
China is not going to stay behind. This is not a question about any of them. This is about what are we going to choose to do to make sure that we participate as the world grows. That's the question. So the debates that we're hearing are debates that have nothing to do with that. And so I think we're paranoid, but not about...
Well, let me ask it a different way. Has the business community failed to define the issues well for the rest of the country? I mean, that message is not getting out.
The answer is yes.
Yes. You cannot say no to that question, because if we were good at it, they would know, right? Obviously, we're not doing that.
I think you've got to give very poor marks both to business and government over the last several years about both working together and defining the issues and doing what's right in terms of educating each other and saying, how do we all win together? Having said that, the one thing that America has been always very good about is we're remarkably resilient. My dad's 87 years old. He said, the right leader always comes at the right time. Companies in America have an ability to readjust. And we still are the best place in the world. People want to come and live here, all nationalities. Our innovation, our legal system, even in spite of some of the problems and patents and other issues, it's still one of the best in the world and most predictable. And there's a willingness to work together toward common goals. So I don't think it's about parties. I think it's about, do we move to the middle, and do we put America not just back to work? Do we set an audacious goal with the top 5 in the top 5 categories, and do we go make it happen as a country? And I think I'd give us poor marks as business leaders and really keeping that forefront, and poor marks as government leaders. And I don't think it's about party. Now, I do see signs for the first time in quite a while that looks like we have a chance to re-engage.
I agree.
That says there's an inflection point or a tipping point. Do we have the healthy national paranoia that's needed? No. Because it used to be, when we were growing up, 18 of the top 20 companies in the world were here in America. Today it's 5, on its way to 0.
You know, Gary, think about what Americans have seen since, let's say, the last 10 years. 9/11, Enron, Katrina, Lehman Brothers bankruptcy, BP oil spill.
AIG, General.
You know, it's been a tough, you know, and I think business people have been a little bit tone deaf in that context. They say, look, you know, I work for investors. My name's not above the door. I'm accountable. All of us are accountable completely. It's a pure play when you're CEO of a company. But we don't do our investors any favor if we don't get context. If we don't try to sell, here's why we're doing what we're doing. If we allow things like protectionism to grow, that's bad for all of our investors, ultimately. So I just think, you know, the last decade has been different than the previous 3 decades before that. And we've got to understand that, you know, we didn't plan it all that way, but we better fix it with regard to the fact that those things have happened.
So do you think the business community has to stand up more and be vocal on these issues?
Have to. Just no choice. I think it's not like this and that, but if you want to be a pro-investor, if you want to be good for your company, if you want to be good for Xerox and good for Cisco and good for GE, you also have to describe how your company fits in a broader context.
But
there's just no choice.
It isn't just talking about it, we've got to follow with our actions. And that's back to the measurement, setting invisible goals, often goals that many people wouldn't have the courage to do, and then implementing on those goals, and then properly sharing with people what we're doing and why. Are any of us perfect? Of course not. But it is a very competitive society, and one that I think can bounce back in a big way. I still think innovation is what changes the world, but it's innovation with good execution, where groups that traditionally have not worked together have to work tighter together. And that way we are falling behind, but I think we have the courage to catch back up rather quickly.
Indeed, if I may give a shameless self-plug at this point.
I'll give the plug for you. We're in the middle of a comeback opportunity. And I think it's a very good book, and for those of you who haven't read it, I encourage you to take a look at it. It is very well done.
Listen. Gary, I've got like,
And it covers every issue we've talked about.
I've got 20 jet engines I need sold. Okay, John.
All right, I got it. Let me tell you about Jeff's engine.
He's the best.
But you know,
Thank
another
you, John.
thing we haven't talked about American innovation. We're about to hit a productivity increase, probably as a country of 3 to 5% for a decade. That occurred from mid-1990s to 2004. It is all around how you combine technology, innovation, and business process, and these are no longer separate. And if you begin to, as a country, grow your productivity at 3 to 5%, you suddenly can make all these other changes we talk about it pretty well. GE can have its employees all over the world, but have them work together and take them virtually into each account situation. Ursula can have her teams develop products in a collaborative fashion at a speed that others cannot match because of how we combine this technology with rapid business process change with healthy paranoia. So I think the next decade can be very bright if we execute well, and I think it's something we've all got to step up.
And technology and innovation is what creates wealth. I mean, let's face it. You know, if you say, you know, what would be the biggest predictor of national wealth? It's how many engineers you graduate, how many patents. You know, when I travel around the world and you meet with government leaders like John and Ursula said, they don't sit there and say, you know, we're really curious about, you know, could you send some lawyers over here? You know,
But we should.
You know, your financial system. Let's copy your financial system. They want to know what's in your brain. You know,
Yeah,
they want it, and that's the wealth creator globally. So I just think in some ways the crisis I think should help us remember again what's really
What made
important.
us great.
Yes.
You know,
I think all three of you.
and that I think, you know, like John said, we've all made plenty of mistakes, but one of them you can't, you know, the one mistake you can't make is not learning from your mistakes. That is the one thing.
Our
you can't do.
society accepts mistakes,
Yeah.
and we've got to realize if you're going to lead, you've got to be taking good
That's
business
one of the
risks.
strengths.
All of them will not come through. In Silicon Valley, if you haven't made a couple of mistakes, and you don't have a red badge of courage,
It's a badge of honor and experience.
it really is. And you've got to have a culture that accepts that. Many countries around the world do not.
We're the only one that does.
Well, not the only one, but we do it better than most.
We've covered the big picture issues for the country, and I think there's a lot of consensus in a whole range from trade to education to tax to investment to just a goal setting. And I don't know if we mentioned the 50%, I'm sorry, the increase in 5 years of 100% in exports, which is very admirable, and a lot of these things would feed into that. Let me pivot to each of your companies and your own innovation strategy. If each of you could talk briefly about that, I think the audience would welcome that.
Can you start?
Sure.
For us, it seems simple, but it's about simple. It's about smaller, simpler, faster, more integrated. In the past, we were able to throw stuff at consumers and have them figure out a way to make it work. What we're finding now is that consumers want us to figure out a way to make it work for them and to have it significantly more integrated. And a lot of my work, a lot of my R&D investments are around simple things like making it small and making it simple, but working with partners to make sure that we can integrate excellently in front of the customers and take the burden off of them. So it's interesting how much R&D dollars I spend on a product, from making the newest, the best, which we do, high-speed digital printing technologies and color. We do that better than anyone. That's not enough. I have to work with John to figure out a way to make that operate in a client site more seamlessly with the technologies that he puts out as well, and with Jeff, what GE does. So a lot of our work is on collaboration in an interesting way. So simpler, smaller, faster. Don't go too far from home, but go far enough away that you can work with the best around the world.